Greetings. Today we'll start with the last lesson by Alphonse Daudet. Before going into that, I'd like to give a historical introduction to the story. And the setting of the story is roughly 1870 to 73, when, for the first time, a unified German political entity had come into existence, and especially after the newly formed unified German government had managed to defeat France. At that time, France was ruled by a cousin of the original Napoleon, Napoleon III. His name was Louis Napoleon. He was the Emperor of France. He had taken over power in 1851 in a coup, and his government was largely unprepared for the war. Anyway, in the story, you will come across a character called Franz, who is ethnically German, doesn't know French quite well, and later laments about his inability to, why he had wasted such valuable time doing other things rather than learning French, because the opportunity seemed to be lost forever. Anyway, the region which is called Alsace and Lorraine, these are originally German speaking areas. The inhabitants were Germans, but they had been part of France in 1683. In 1683, King Louis XIV of France had conquered these areas. And later, the allegiance of these people to France got further cemented on account of the land reforms which took place in the aftermath of the French Revolution, when the aristocracy was largely expropriated and lands were given to the peasants. Church lands were auctioned. So, politically speaking, this was the people, they considered themselves to be loyal citizens of France, but ethnically, linguistically, they were Germans. And when a unified Germany was formed, uh, obviously the German government wanted to reclaim back that area. And therein we get the story. Therein we have the setting, the dilemma of, of characters like Franz, who identified themselves as Frenchmen, but were actually ethnically Germans. So let's start with the story. I started for school very late that morning and was in great dread of a scolding, especially because Monsieur Hamel had said that he would question us on participles, and I did not know the first word about them. He started for school very late, means I mean, got ready and ventured out from his home to school very late. And why? He was also terrified because Monsieur Hamel, the French teacher, he'd be asking questions on participles from French grammar, which France was, quite reluctant to face. He did not know the first word about them. Means he was completely ignorant about French grammar. For a moment, I thought of running away and spending the day out of doors. It was so warm, so bright. The birds were chirping at the edge of the woods, and in the open field back of the sawmill, the Prussian soldiers were drilling. Prussian soldiers, Prussia was a kingdom under which a unified Germany has been created. So there was a Prussian garrison nearby. So So his village contained a Prussian garrison of soldiers, and they were drilling. Drilling means engaging in military maneuvers, military exercises. So there was a lot to see in the place where he lived. Um, so he thought of missing. He thought of not going to school and play the truant. It was all much more tempting than the rule of participles, but I had the strength to resist and hurried off to school. But finally, he had enough strength of mind to go to school and resist such temptations which assailed his mind, temptations about not going to school. When I passed the town hall, there was a crowd in front of the bulletin board. Bulletin boards where official notices were struck, and people could view them. People who could read and write, they could read those notices. For the last 2 years, all our bad news had come from here. The lost battles, the draft, and the orders of the commanding officer. I thought myself, without stopping, what can be the matter now? So a huge crowd had gathered near the bulletin board. And since the last few years, they'd only been receiving bad news. For example, the defeats. I mean, France had been defeated in the war against Prussia in 1871. News of defeats. Then draft. Draft means conscription. Civilians being conscripted into the military as an emergency temporary measure during the war. The orders of the commanding officer. All such notices I mean, were put there on the board. And he thought, what can be the matter now? Then, as I hurried by as fast as I could, the blacksmith, Wachter, who was there with his apprentice reading the bulletin, called after me, "Don't go so fast, Bob, but you'll go to your school in plenty of time." So Wachter was the blacksmith with his apprentice. Apprentice means young assistant who will later take over the business. A young assistant who is learning the work of a blacksmith. So he cautioned Franz against rushing to school, asked him to proceed slowly. I thought he was making fun of me and reached Monsieur Hamel's little garden all out of breath. But Franz didn't pay any attention to Wachter and rushed all the way to the school. Um, a garden surrounded the school, so he was panting literally. He was out of breath by the time he reached the school. Usually, when the school began, there was a great bustle which could be heard out in the street, the opening and closing of desks, lessons repeated in unison. Unison means together. Very loud with our hands over our ears to understand better, and the teacher's great ruler rapping on the table. So these were the usual sounds. But this was not a usual day. It was something unusual was happening. But now it was also still. It was very silent. I had counted on the commotion to get to my desk without being noticed. But of course, that day, everything had to be as quiet as Sunday morning. Everything was so unusually quiet. Through the window, I saw my classmates already in their places and Monsieur Hamel walking up and down with his terrible iron ruler under his arm. I had to open the door and go in before everybody. You can imagine how I blushed and how frightened I was. So he had to, in front of everybody, he entered the classroom because he had reached late. He was fearful. He was also ashamed. That's why he blushed. But nothing happened. Monsieur Hamel saw me and said very kindly, "Go to your place quickly, little Franz. We are beginning without you." Means take your seat. Franz. Little Franz, the term little is some term of endearment from a teacher towards a student. So in other days, it would have been, Monsieur Hamel would have scolded Franz. But this day was different. It was the day of the last lesson. a very tragic thing, a very painful, a very melancholic thing for the teacher. So that's why he didn't scold Franz. I jumped over the bench and sat down at my desk. Not till then, when I got a little over my fright, when I got a little over my fright, and when I overcame my fright, my fear, a little bit, did I see that that teacher had on his beautiful green coat, his frilled shirt, and the little black silk cap, all embroidered, that he never wore except on inspection and prize days. So basically, Monsieur Hamel had put on his best clothes, which he usually used to wear on um, when the schools was being inspected by school inspectors or when during prize distribution ceremony. He was wearing his best dress. Besides, the whole school seemed so strange and solemn. But the thing that surprised me most was to see on the back benches that were always empty the village people sitting quietly like ourselves. What astonished Franz most was the presence of the villagers sitting at the back benches, sitting quietly. Who were there? Who were those? Old Hauser with his three-cornered hat, the former mayor, the ex-mayor, the former postmaster, and several others besides. Former mayor and former postmaster means under French rule, the person who had held the office of mayor and also the person who had held the office of the postmaster under French rule. Now it's different. Now it's German rule. They had been sacked from their jobs. Soon, Monsieur Hamel will also will come to know that Monsieur Hamel has also been sacked. Everyone looked sad, and Hauser had brought an old primer, thumbed at the edges, and he held it open on his knees with his great spectacles lying across the pages. Everyone's looked sad, and Mr. Hauser had brought with him a French grammar book. While I was wondering about it all, Monsieur Hamel mounted his chair, and in the same grave means very serious and gentle tone, which he had used to me, said, "My children, this is the last lesson I shall give you. The order has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new master comes tomorrow. This is your last French lesson. We want you to be very attentive." So he announced he gave basically all the questions which arose in the mind of Franz were answered by Monsieur Hamel. That this is the last lesson which I'll give. From Berlin, we have received orders that I am supposed to leave and a German teacher will come in my place. So this is the last lesson. Pay careful attention to it. What a thunderclap these words were to me. It's like as if I'd been struck by lightning. Such surprising, I mean, astonishment. Franz had never imagined this. He had never anticipated this. Anticipated this. Oh, the wretches, that was what they had put up at the town hall. My last French lesson? Why, I hardly knew how to write. I should never learn any more. I must stop there then. Oh, how sorry I was not learning my lessons, for seeking birds' eggs or going sliding in the Saar. Saar is a river. So here we get the lamentation of Franz. My books that had seemed such a nuisance means continuous source of trouble, a while ago, so heavy to carry. My grammar and my history of the saints were old friends now that I couldn't give up. So initially he had felt his books to be kind of a burden, but now he felt that it's things which he can never part with. He never learned to write French properly. He is deeply sad about this. And Monsieur Hamel too. The idea that he was going away, that I should never see him again, made me forget all about his ruler and how cranky he was. The very fact that Monsieur Hamel will go, he'll never teach again at the school, made Franz forget all the past punishments which Monsieur Hamel had inflicted on him. Poor man, it was in honor of this last lesson that he had put on his Sunday clothes, fine Sunday clothes. And now I understood why the old men of the village were sitting there in the back of the room. So it was the villagers had gathered in his honor and also in the honor of Franz. It was, I mean, because it was they were French citizens, so the departure of the French teacher was very symbolic. The destruction of the old order and the beginning of a new one, the German. It was because they were sorry too that they had not gone to school more. It was their way of thanking our master for his 40 years of faithful service and of showing their respect for the country that was theirs no more. So they wanted to show their respect to both to Monsieur Hammond and also to France itself. Very, I mean, the setting, the atmosphere is very melancholic. More so because they were being forcibly annexed to a country of which they didn't want to be part of. Despite being Germans, they had no intention of being part of Germany. But still, they had been conquered. Military defeat often leads to such situations. While I was thinking of all this, I heard my name called. So Monsieur Hamel called his name. It was my turn to recite. What would I not have given to be able to say that dreadful rule for the participle all through, very loud and clear and without one mistake? But I got mixed up on the first words and stood there, holding on to my desk, my heart beating and not daring to look up. So Franz I mean, he couldn't repeat his lesson properly, got things mixed up. I mean, why? Because he never paid any attention to the lessons which were given by Monsieur Hamel. So his imperfect acquaintance with the French language was responsible for this state of affairs. So he stood on his desk. His heart was beating in fear. He couldn't even dare to look up to Monsieur Hamel. I heard Monsieur Hamel said to me, "I won't scold you, little Franz. You must feel bad enough." Means you're feeling miserable, I can understand. See how it is. Every day we have said to ourselves, "Bah, I have plenty of time, I'll learn it tomorrow." And now you see where we have come out. Ah, that's the great trouble with Alsace. She puts off learning till tomorrow. Now these fellows out there have the right to say to you, these fellows means the Germans. Uh, how is it you pretend to be Frenchmen, yet you can neither speak nor write your own language? But you are not the worst, poor little Franz. We all have a great deal to reproach ourselves with. Means reproach means blame. Means it's people of Alsace have a habit of putting things up for tomorrow. It can be done tomorrow, so let's not do it right now. It's the very opposite of the ideal of carpe diem, means seize the day. Perform your duties as if this is your last day to live, in perfection. People of Alsace have the very opposite attitude towards life and work. Your parents were not anxious enough to have you learn. They preferred to put you to work on a farm or at the mills as to have a little more money. So your parents were not also, did not pay much attention to your studies. They uh, made you work at the farm or also made you work at the mills, the factory, so as to gain some more extra income for the family. And I have been to blame also. Have I not often sent you to water my flowers instead of learning your lessons? And when I wanted to go fishing, did I not just give you a holiday? I am also to be blamed for this situation. Did I not often entrust you with watering the flowers in my garden? Or when I went to fishing, did I not uh, give a holiday instead of conducting a class? Then, from one thing to other, Monsieur Hamel went to talk of the French language. So, after talking about, I mean, after basically blaming himself for uh, the situation which France found himself in, not being able to read and write French properly, he then moved to a different topic. Monsieur Hamel went on to talk of the French language, saying that it was the most beautiful language in the world, the clearest, the most logical, that we must guard it among us, never forget it. Because when a people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they had the key to their prison. Then he opened the grammar and read us our lesson. So, Monsieur Hamel then extolled about the glories of the French language. It is the most logical one, it is the most beautiful language. And if a subjugated people hold on to their language, then despite their political subjugation, culturally they will remain free. And as long as their culture remains outside the bounds of subjugation, the chances of revival will be there. As long as the distinct cultural identity remains, uh, the struggle for freedom will continue. It will be there. It won't be suppressed. This is Monsieur Hamel's opinion. So they should hold on to the French language. And then he started the last lesson. I was amazed to hear how well I understood it. All he said seemed so easy, so easy. I think that I think too that I had never listened so carefully, and that he never explained everything with so much patience. It seemed almost as if the poor man wanted to give us all he knew before going away, and to put it into our heart at one stroke. So, but and then when Monsieur Hamel started the lesson, m- Franz felt incredible that how easy it is. Previously, everything seemed so difficult. But now, for him, it's as if how smooth, how lucid everything seemed. And he felt that Monsieur Hamel was trying to give his best, trying to communicate whatever he knew to the pupils, because this was to be the last lesson. After the grammar, after the grammar, we had a lesson in writing. That day, Monsieur Hamel had new copies for us, written in a beautiful round hand. Fonce Alsace, Fonce Alsace. They looked like little flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rod at the top of our desks. You ought to have seen how everyone set to work and how quiet it was. The only sound was the scratching of the fence over the paper. Once some beetles flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them, not even the little ones, who worked right on tracing their fish hooks, as if that was French too. On the roof of the pigeons cooed very low, and I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? Then he gave the writing task. Nobody paid any attention towards the insects or the birds which were nearby. And a very funny thought came to Franz's mind that will the Germans force the pigeons to sing in German too instead of French? Obviously, I mean, he had no political consciousness. He only knew that his own country had been defeated and the Germans had taken over. That's it. Whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw Monsieur Hamel sitting motionless, without any movement, in his chair and gazing first at one thing, looking at one thing, at another, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little schoolroom. Fancy. For 40 years he had been there in the same place, with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him. Just like that. For 40 years, the school was perhaps the ground floor. On the first floor he lived with his sister, and there was a garden just outside the school building. And for 40 years, Missy Hamill had served. Only the desks and benches have been worn smooth. The walnut trees in the garden were taller. The hop vine that he had planted himself twined about the windows to the roof. Means its elevation had increased. How it must have broken his heart to leave it all. Poor man, to hear his sister moving about in the room above, packing their trunks, for they must leave the country next day. So France was trying to grasp what Missy Hamill may have been feeling about the very idea of moving out from Alsace, from that village where he had served. But he had the courage to hear every lesson to the very last. After the writing, we had the lesson in history. First participles, then writing, then history. And then the babies chanted their ba, be, boo, be, bo, boo. Down there at the back of the room, old Hauser had put on his spectacles and holding his primer in both hands, spelled the letters with them. Old Hauser was spelling the letters, alphabets. You could see that he too was crying. His voice trembled with emotion. It was so funny to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry. Ah, how well I remember it, the last lesson. The old Hauser, with his primer in his hands, he too was crying, sobbing. And it was both a funny as well as a sad spectacle, according to France. All at once, the church clock struck 12. It was 12 o'clock, afternoon. Then the Angelus. Angelus, it's a prayer. It's sung in churches, in Catholic churches. It's dedicated to Mary, the mother of Jesus. It's like, I can recite the first few lines like Angelus Domini nunc iat in varie Ave Maria gratia plena Dominus tecum benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui Iesus Sancta Maria Mater Dei ora pro nobis peccatoribus nunc et in hora nostris. Anyway, so Mother Mary, save us from sinners, Mother, the woman who bore God in her womb. Sancta Maria Mater Dei means Sacred Mary, Mother of God. The Angelus is sung in honor and praise of Mary, the mother of Jesus, in Latin. So, at the clock struck 12, Angelus was sung from the church. And at the same moment, the trumpets of the Prussians returning from the drill sounded under our windows. At that time only, the Prussians were returning. The German soldiers who had been stationed there, they were also returning from their drills. Monsieur Hamel stood up, very pale, in his chair. I never saw him look so tall. My friend, said he. But something choked him. He could not go on. Then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and bearing on with all his might, he wrote as large as he could. Vive l'Alphonse, means long live France. Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall, and without a word he made a gesture to us with his hand. School is dismissed, you may go. So this was the last lesson. And how, so we get to know about it, from the perspective of France. He's the narrator in this case. So one has to be very careful about from whose perspective the entire story is set. Anyway, that's it. That's the last lesson. I'll be uploading videos from the others regarding other stories very soon.